Brit. "You're sleeping with me now?" said the cowboy after saving the Apache girl from wild animals. The sun rose slowly over the rugged landscape of the southwest, casting long, golden shadows across the rocky hills and dusty plains. Brit. The air was still except for the soft rustle of the wind through the sparse desert shrubs and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Life on the frontier was harsh and unpredictable. Every day was a test of courage and skill, and only those who could move silently, think quickly, and act decisively could survive. Among those who knew this life well was a cowboy, a solitary man who had spent most of his years wandering these lands alone. Brit. His name was James, though most people in the nearby settlement simply called him the Cowboy. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hands hardened by years of riding and rope work, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Rand. James had learned early that the wilderness was both beautiful and cruel. He had seen storms sweep through the plains without warning, turning dry riverbeds into raging torrents. He had encountered rattlesnakes hidden among the rocks, and he had been forced to fight off animals that grew too curious about a lone human wandering in their territory. Despite all this, he felt a deep connection to the land. There was freedom in the wide open spaces, a quiet that no town or settlement could ever offer. But freedom came at a price. One wrong step, one careless moment, and a person could be lost forever. Far to the east, a small Apache tribe moved carefully through the canyons. Among them was a young girl named Nayeli. She was 12 years old, with long dark hair that shimmered in the sunlight, and eyes that seemed to reflect the endless sky above. She was curious and brave, but the world around her could be frightening. Her people had taught her how to read the land, how to find water in hidden streams, how to recognize the tracks of different animals, and how to move quietly so as not to disturb the wildlife. She was learning quickly, and sometimes she felt she was ready for more than what her age should allow. That morning, Nayeli wandered slightly away from the main group. She had spotted a rabbit darting across the rocks and, in a playful mood, had followed it, weaving through the boulders and sandy paths. She loved exploring, but in her excitement she didn't notice how far she had gone, or how alone she had become. The sun climbed higher, and the familiar sounds of her family faded behind her. The desert, which had seemed so inviting, now felt immense and lonely. James was riding along a narrow trail that cut between two low hills, scanning the horizon as he went. He moved slowly, his horse picking its way carefully over the uneven ground. Desperate cowboys like him often traveled alone. Settlements were few and far between, and many people preferred to keep to themselves. James had learned to notice small signs, a bent branch indicating a recent passage, a set of animal tracks, the faint echo of human voices carried by the wind. Today, something caught his attention. Among the usual tracks of rabbits and coyotes, he noticed a set of footprints that seemed out of place. They were small, delicate, and fresh. Curious! He guided his horse toward them, moving cautiously. The tracks led him to a small ravine, a place where rocks jutted out in sharp angles and the shadows were deep and cool.
Peering over the edge. Peering over the edge.
Peering over the edge. He saw her. Nayeli had stopped at a patch of grass, crouched down, her eyes following the rabbit as it vanished into a small hole.
She didn't see him at first, and that was fortunate. From this distance, James could assess the situation. Something about the way she was positioned made him uneasy. The tracks around her were not just her own. There were other, larger tracks nearby, circling like a warning. Wolves. The realization hit James instantly. Wolves were common in this area, but they rarely attacked humans unless provoked or desperate. These ones were hungry, he could tell, and they had already spotted the girl. Desperate. Her small movements, the quick, careless steps she had taken while chasing the rabbit, had drawn their attention. James felt a surge of urgency, but he could not leave her there. He guided his horse down the slope carefully, trying to make as little noise as possible while getting closer. His mind raced. He had faced wild animals before, but this situation required precision and timing. One wrong move, and the girl could be hurt. Or worse, he had to act fast. As he drew closer, he could see the wolves circling, low to the ground, their eyes fixed on Nayeli. She had finally sensed them and froze, terror flashing across her face. Her small hands clutched at the dirt, trying to make herself appear smaller, as if hiding could save her. James called out softly, though he knew his voice could startle her. Hey there! Stay calm!
I've got you.
His words were steady, though his heart pounded in his chest.
The wolves paused, unsure of the new presence. He reached for his rifle, checking that it was ready. He didn't want to scare the animals too soon. He needed to control the situation. Slowly, carefully, he approached, keeping the rifle between himself and the girl, using it as both a tool and a shield. Nayeli's eyes widened as she saw him. She didn't speak. She was too frightened. The cowboy's presence was both reassuring and strange. She had never seen a man like him up close before. Tall, strong, with weathered skin and a calm, commanding air.
Yet she trusted him instinctively, a survival instinct honed by years of listening to her elders. James slowly raised his hand, signaling the girl to stay still.
The wolves were hesitant now, growling low and circling but not yet attacking. He took a careful step forward, then another, making sure not to provoke them. With a steady aim, he fired his rifle, not at the wolves themselves, but near them, a warning shot. The sound echoed across the ravine, startling the animals. They yelped and scattered, retreating into the brush, leaving the girl unharmed. For a long moment, everything was silent except for the heavy breathing of horse and man and the soft whisper of wind through the rocks. Nayeli blinked, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Her legs felt weak, and she sank to the ground, relief washing over her. The cowboy dismounted, approaching slowly, his hands open to show he meant no harm. "You're safe now," he said quietly.
They won't bother you anymore. Nayeli nodded, her voice catching in her throat. She wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come.
Instead, she simply watched as he helped her to her feet, guiding her to a safer part of the ravine where the wolves could not return so easily. As the morning light continued to brighten, James looked at the girl and realized how small and vulnerable she was in this vast wild land. He felt a protective instinct, one that had guided him through countless encounters in the wilderness before. He knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult for her if she returned to her people alone. And so, silently, he made a decision to stay close, at least until she was safe again. The desert stretched endlessly around them, full of dangers and mysteries. But in that quiet, tense moment, between the rocks and the rising sun, a connection formed between two people from very different worlds. One hardened by life on the open plains, the other young and learning to navigate the wilds of her home. Both were aware that the land demanded respect, courage, and quick thinking.
And both understood without words that survival often depended on trust.
James helped Nayeli gather herself, brushing off the dust and checking her for scratches or injuries.
She shook her head, indicating she was unharmed. He nodded, satisfied. The two of them moved slowly out of the ravine, keeping their eyes open for any sign of further danger. Every step was cautious, every movement deliberate. The cowboy's experience and the girl's instincts combined to create a careful, almost silent rhythm. By the time the sun had fully risen, casting the desert in sharp relief, James and Nayeli had reached a small clearing. There, he let her rest, offering water from his canteen and a piece of bread he had carried. She accepted it gratefully, still a little wary, but beginning to feel the comfort of safety. Brit. In that moment, surrounded by the vast, unforgiving wilderness, both realized that their lives had intersected for a reason. It was the beginning of a story neither could have predicted. A story of survival, courage, and the unexpected bond that forms when two strangers find themselves alone against the wild. Brit. And while neither of them knew what the coming days would bring, for now, the cowboy and the Apache girl shared a quiet understanding that the land was dangerous, but together, they had faced it and survived. Brit. The morning air was crisp, and the sunlight fell gently across the desert, warming the rocky ground where the cowboy and the Apache girl now rested. Nayeli sat on a flat stone, still catching her breath, while James kept a watchful eye on the surrounding hills and canyons. Brit. The earlier encounter with the wolves had left her shaken, and though she tried to appear calm, small tremors ran through her fingers as she held the bread in her hands. James noticed, but he did not speak harshly. Brit. Words could wait. Survival required patience and observation. After a few moments, he finally spoke, his voice low and steady. Brit.
You did well back there. You stayed still when you needed to.
Brit. Most kids wouldn't have done that. Nayeli looked up at him, surprised. Brit. She was not used to praise from strangers, especially men. Her people valued courage, yes, but it was often measured in actions over words. Brit. I was scared, she admitted softly, her eyes still flicking nervously toward the distant brush where the wolves had disappeared. Brit. Fear keeps you alive sometimes. Don't be ashamed of it. Brit. It tells you when to be careful, when to act. This man, rough and serious, seemed to understand the wilderness in a way that even her elders did. But she still felt uneasy. She was far from her family, and even though she had survived the immediate danger, the desert itself was full of threats. One could trip on a loose stone, sink into a dry riverbed, or wander too close to the edge of a cliff without realizing it. The cowboy had seen these dangers countless times, and his calm presence was a small shield against the vast unknown.
James looked around, scanning the horizon.
Brit. The desert seemed quiet now, but he knew better than to trust appearances. Predators rarely attacked without reason, but danger could come in other forms. Snakes, scorpions, or even sudden storms that turned a dry plain into a treacherous trap. Brit. He gestured toward the path that led back toward the canyon where Nayeli's tribe was camped. We should start moving soon, he said. Brit. You can't stay here too long. Nayeli hesitated. She had not gone this far from her family before, and the thought of returning alone was terrifying. Brit. Yet she also sensed that the cowboy was right. Staying still in one place made them vulnerable. Brit. She nodded quietly. Yes? Brit, we should go. They began to walk, carefully picking their way through the uneven ground. Brit. James led the way, his horse following behind. Breath. Nayeli stumbled occasionally, but he kept close enough to catch her if she fell. He pointed out hidden dangers as they moved. Watch the sand over there. Could be a rattlesnake hiding beneath. She nodded, learning quickly from his instructions. Brit, each warning was a lesson, each cautious step a reminder of how fragile life could be in the wilderness. Despite her fear, she began to feel a strange sense of admiration for this man who seemed so confident and calm. Brit. She had never seen anyone move through the desert with such awareness, noticing every detail, every shadow, every sound. Brit. As they walked, James spoke quietly, telling stories of his past, Stories of storms he had survived, animals he had outsmarted, and moments when he had come close to death. He spoke not to boast, but to teach. But Nayeli listened intently, realizing that knowledge and experience were as important as courage. The desert did not forgive mistakes, but preparation and awareness could save lives. Their journey was slow but steady. The sun climbed higher in the sky and the heat began to intensify. They took occasional breaks, drinking water from the cowboys' canteen and resting in the shade of boulders. During one of these pauses, Nayeli spoke up. Do you ever get lonely? She asked, her voice small. James considered her question for a moment. Sometimes, he admitted. But the desert teaches you to be strong, to rely on yourself. Loneliness isn't always bad. But it makes you aware of who you are, what you can do. Nayeli thought about that.
In her tribe, people were never truly alone. Family and community were always near. Yet, she could see the truth in his words.
Being alone in the wilderness demanded focus, courage, and patience. She admired that he could face it every day without losing himself. As the day wore on, the terrain began to change. The flat plains gave way to rocky ridges and narrow canyons. The wind picked up, carrying a faint scent of water from a distant stream. James led the way carefully, his eyes scanning the cliffs above for signs of danger. Wolves could return and other predators could be nearby, but this was also a sign of hope. Water meant life, and it meant they were moving closer to safety. Suddenly, Nayeli froze. Her ears picked up a sound before James did. A low rustling coming from the rocks above. Her heart jumped into her throat. She knew the sound of animals, and this was different. Something was watching them. She looked at James, fear in her eyes. He followed her gaze and immediately tensed. "Stay close," he whispered, positioning himself between her and the potential threat. He lifted his rifle carefully, scanning the shadows. The rustling grew louder, and for a moment, it felt as though the canyon itself was holding its breath. Then, out of the shadows, a mountain lion emerged, sleek and silent, its golden eyes locked onto the pair, muscles coiled and ready to spring. Nayeli's breath caught in her chest. She wanted to run, but James held her gently by the shoulder. "Stay calm," he said. "Slowly. Back away with me." Step by step they moved, never taking their eyes off the predator. James spoke quietly, instructing Nayeli to remain still unless he said otherwise. The mountain lion watched them, calculating, testing their courage. In that tense silence, Nayeli realized how fragile life truly was. One wrong movement, and either of them could be injured, or worse. James took another careful step, then another, gradually guiding them toward a narrow ledge where the mountain lion could not follow. His knowledge of the land gave them an advantage. He understood the animal's behavior, its limits, and its instincts. Slowly, the predator lost interest and disappeared into the shadows, leaving only the sound of wind and distant bird song. Nayeli exhaled shakily. Her legs trembled, but she managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. James nodded, his expression softening. "It's what I'm here for." "You're safe now, but we have to keep moving." As they continued, the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the rocks. The canyon walls glowed with warm colors, reds and golds blending together in a breathtaking display. Despite the danger and fear, Nayeli felt a strange sense of awe. Brit. The land was harsh and wild, but it was also beautiful, full of colors and shapes she had never noticed before. By evening, they reached a small plateau that overlooked a stream winding through the canyon below. Brit. James helped Nayeli climb up to a safe spot where they could rest. He set up a small camp, building a fire with careful precision. The girl watched, fascinated by the way he moved, how he knew which stones to use, and how to keep the flames contained. As the fire crackled, James handed her some food and water. Brit. They ate in silence for a while, both lost in their thoughts. The events of the day had left them exhausted, but the shared experience had also created a bond between them. Brit. Nayeli began to feel trust growing, a quiet confidence that this man would not let harm come to her. Night fell, and the desert transformed. The temperature dropped, and the stars appeared, countless and bright, stretching across the sky. The wind whispered through the rocks, carrying stories of the land and its creatures.
Desperate.
Nayeli looked at James, sensing a strength in him that went beyond physical skill. He had faced the wilderness countless times and understood its rhythms, its dangers, and its beauty.
Brit. He noticed her gaze and spoke softly. The night can be dangerous too, he said. Brit. Coyotes, snakes, even storms. But it's also a time to rest, to gather strength. Brit. That's just as important. Nayeli nodded, realizing the truth in his words. Brit. She curled up on a small blanket, trying to calm her racing heart. For the first time that day, she felt safe enough to close her eyes. Brit. The cowboy kept watch, his eyes scanning the darkness, alert for any sign of movement. In the quiet of the night, a connection formed between the two of them. But it was not yet friendship, but a bond forged in shared survival and mutual respect. Both understood that life in the wilderness demanded trust, courage, and awareness. Brit. And in that understanding, a sense of comfort emerged. Small but powerful. A reminder that even in a world full of danger, humans could rely on each other. The night passed slowly, but uneventfully. Dawn would come, bringing new challenges. But for now there was peace. The cowboy and the Apache girl rested, preparing for whatever lay ahead, knowing that together they had already faced the worst of what the wild could throw at them. And survived. Breath. The next morning the sunlight broke through the horizon in soft orange and pink streaks, painting the desert rocks in a warm glow. James stirred first, stretching his arms and scanning the canyon with trained eyes. But he listened for any sound that might signal danger. The distant cry of a hawk, the rustle of brush, or the faint tracks of animals moving nearby. Nayeli, still sleepy, blinked in the morning light, her small frame curled up on the blanket. But she yawned and rubbed her eyes, realizing that she had slept through the night without harm. The relief she felt was almost overwhelming. James offered her a small sip of water and a piece of bread. "Eat up," he said. Brit. "You'll need energy for the day ahead." Nayeli took it with quiet gratitude, noticing how calm and controlled he was. It was strange for her to feel safe near someone she had just met, but the trust that had begun the day before had grown stronger overnight. Brit. He did not rush her or speak harshly. He simply made sure she had what she needed. Brit. They packed up the small camp and began moving down the canyon toward the stream. The water glimmered in the sunlight, a welcome sight for anyone traveling through the desert. Brit. James led the way carefully, helping Nayeli navigate the slippery stones and shallow pools. He reminded her to step lightly, explaining that wet rocks could be dangerous if one lost balance. Brit. Nayeli listened attentively, absorbing every word, aware that every lesson was important for her survival. As they walked along the stream, the desert around them changed. Brit. Trees grew taller near the water, and small flowers bloomed along the banks, their colors bright against the dusty brown of the canyon. Birds chirped from the branches, and the air smelled fresh, a rare relief from the usual dry desert wind. For a brief moment, Nayeli felt almost at peace. She began to imagine what it would be like to be back with her family, safe from the threats of the wild. But peace in the desert was often short-lived. James noticed movement on the opposite bank of the stream, a shadow that shifted unnaturally. He signaled for Nayeli to stay quiet and crouched low, observing the shape carefully. It was not an animal. It was a man. He was moving slowly, almost stealthily, and James's instincts told him something was wrong. He whispered to Nayeli, "Stay close and don't make a sound." We might need to move carefully." Nayeli's heart raced, and she nodded, pressing herself against the rocks. She could feel the tension in James's body, the way he was ready to act at a moment's notice. The man across the stream seemed to notice them as well, pausing to look in their direction. James calculated quickly. He was likely a hunter or a traveler, but he could be dangerous if approached carelessly. The desert had taught him that not all humans could be trusted, and experience had honed his ability to judge character quickly. Instead of confronting the man immediately, James decided to take a detour. He led Nayeli along a narrow path that climbed the side of the canyon, keeping them hidden behind rocks and bushes. The climb was difficult, and Nayeli struggled at times, but James offered a steadying hand and encouraging words.
"You're doing fine," he said.
Just one step at a time. Eventually, they reached a small ledge above the stream where they could rest and reassess the situation. Nayeli's legs trembled from the climb, and she sat down, letting out a sigh of exhaustion. James handed her water again and waited, keeping his eyes on the canyon below. The man across the stream eventually moved on, disappearing down a side path. James let out a quiet breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "He's gone," he said.
"We're safe for now, but we have to keep moving." Nayeli nodded, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear.
She realized that the desert was not just home to animals, but also to other humans whose intentions could not always be predicted.
The cowboy had protected her again, and she felt a growing sense of trust in his judgment. As they continued their journey, the terrain became more challenging. The canyon walls grew taller and the paths narrower. Loose rocks shifted under their feet, and the sun beat down more harshly.
James encouraged Nayeli to move slowly and carefully, explaining how to test each step before putting her full weight on it. Every careful movement was a lesson in patience and awareness, and Nayeli began to understand the value of these small but important actions.
Around midday, they came to a small clearing where the stream widened into a shallow pool. James suggested they rest and refill their canteen. Nayeli knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands and drinking deeply. She felt the cool water wash away some of the tension from the morning. James, sitting nearby, kept watch, scanning the cliffs and the surrounding desert for any sign of danger.
While they rested, Nayeli began to ask questions.
"How do you know all these things about the desert?" she asked, curiosity mixing with admiration. James smiled faintly.
Experience, he said. You learn by paying attention, by surviving. Every mistake teaches you something, and every day out here gives you lessons you won't forget. Nayeli nodded, absorbing his words. She realized that her own training in the tribe was similar, but James had lived alone in the wilderness, relying entirely on himself. The thought impressed her. She wondered if she could ever be as confident and skilled as he was, if she could face the dangers of the desert without fear.
After a short rest, they continued along the stream, moving more cautiously now.
The canyon was beautiful but treacherous.
Overhanging rocks threatened to fall, and the ground was uneven.
Brit. At one point, Naomi slipped on a wet stone and James caught her arm just in time. Careful, he said gently. Desperate. Every step matters. She looked up at him, grateful for his quick reflexes. I will try, she said. Brit. I want to learn.
James nodded. Good.
Brit. That's the spirit. Out here, learning fast can save your life. Brit. The day wore on, and the desert grew hotter. They had been walking for hours, and both were beginning to tire. Brit. James suggested finding a place to set up a temporary camp for the night. He led Naomi to a small alcove in the canyon wall, sheltered from the wind and sun. Brit. It was not as exposed as their previous camp, offering some protection from both animals and the elements. As they settled down, James began to prepare a small fire, using dry twigs and stones to contain it. Brit. Desperate. Naomi watched, fascinated by the way he worked. Brit. She saw how he chose each piece carefully, how he arranged the stones to prevent the fire from spreading, and how he built it so that it could provide warmth and light without attracting unwanted attention. Brit. When the fire was ready, James handed Naomi a small portion of dried meat he had packed. She ate slowly, savoring the taste, and began to feel a little more at ease. Brit. The firelight flickered across their faces, casting shadows on the canyon walls. The desert was quiet now, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of wind through the rocks. Brit. James looked at Naomi with a serious expression. Tomorrow will be another long day, he said. Brit.
We have to keep moving toward your people. The canyon is full of hidden dangers, and we can't afford to let our guard down.
Brit.
Naomi nodded, understanding the seriousness of his words. I will stay close to you, she promised.
Brit. I will do whatever you say. James gave a small smile. Good, Brit. That's all I ask. As the night deepened, they took turns keeping watch. James taught Naomi how to notice sounds and movements, how to recognize signs of animals nearby, and how to move quietly if needed. Brit. She listened intently, realizing that each lesson could mean the difference between life and death. By the time dawn approached, both were exhausted, but wiser. Brit.
The day had tested their courage, patience, and trust in each other. Naomi had learned more about the desert in a single day than she had in months of training with her tribe.
Brit. She began to understand that the wilderness demanded respect and constant attention, and that survival was not just about strength, but about knowledge, awareness, and careful action. And through it all, the bond between the cowboy and the girl had grown stronger. Brit. It was not yet friendship in the full sense, but it was a connection born of shared experiences, of trust built through danger, and of mutual respect. Brit. They had faced threats together, learned from each other, and survived. And in that understanding, they both knew that whatever challenges awaited them in the coming days, they would face them together. Brit. The next morning, the desert sun rose slowly over the jagged canyon walls, casting long shadows across the rocks. James stirred first, as always, scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Brit. The night had been quiet, but quiet in the wilderness was never a guarantee of safety. He looked over at Naomi, who was still asleep on the small blanket they had laid out. Brit. Her chest rose and fell gently, and her face, touched by the soft light of dawn, looked peaceful. James felt a quiet sense of responsibility wash over him. Brit. Keeping her safe had become more than just survival. It had become personal.
He handed her a small sip of water and some dry bread as she woke.
Brit. Eat slowly, he said. You'll need strength for the day. Naomi nodded, her eyes wide and alert, still processing the events of the past days. Brit. She had faced wolves, a mountain lion, and the constant dangers of the desert, and yet, under James's guidance, she had survived. Each day brought new challenges, and she was learning not only about the wilderness but also about courage, patience, and trust. Britt. They continued along the canyon, following the winding path toward the area where Nayeli's tribe had been camped. The canyon grew narrower, and the walls towered above them, casting long shadows that shifted with the rising sun. But small rocks and loose stones made the path treacherous, and James moved with care, testing each step before putting his weight down. Nayeli followed his movements closely, trying to mirror his caution, her trust in him guiding each careful step. By mid-morning, they reached a part of the canyon where the path narrowed even further, forcing them to walk single file.
James, notice the change in terrain immediately.
Britt. This section was dangerous, not just for slipping or falling, but because it was a natural trap for predators. Wolves, mountain lions, or other animals could easily hide in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. But he signaled for Nayeli to stay close and silent, crouching low as he scanned the rocky edges above and below. It was then that they heard it. A soft rustle from above, almost too quiet to notice. Britt. James froze, his instincts alert. Nayeli instinctively pressed herself against his side, her eyes wide with fear. Britt, stay calm, he whispered, and don't move unless I tell you to. From the shadow of the canyon wall, a mountain lion appeared, its golden eyes gleaming in the sunlight. Britt. It was larger than the one they had encountered before, its muscles coiled and ready to spring. Nayeli's heart pounded in her chest, and she felt paralyzed by fear. Britt. She wanted to run, but James held her gently by the shoulder, keeping her grounded. James raised his rifle slowly, careful not to provoke the animal. But step back with me, he instructed in a low voice. Step by step, he guided Nayeli along the narrow ledge, keeping the mountain lion in sight. Britt. The animal watched them intently, calculating their movements, testing their courage. Every breath felt heavy, every step tense. Britt. Suddenly, the lion lunged, but James was faster. He fired a warning shot, not aiming to harm the animal, but to scare it away. Britt. The lion growled, startled, and leaped toward a nearby rock, narrowly missing them. It crouched again, circling, unwilling to leave its territory. Britt. Nayeli gasped, her small body trembling. She realized then how fragile life could be in the wilderness and how much she depended on James's skill and courage. Britt. James knew they could not remain on the ledge much longer. He needed a plan. And fast. Britt. He looked around, spotting a narrow crevice in the canyon wall that led to a small alcove. Move carefully, he whispered. Follow me exactly. One wrong step and it could be dangerous. Nayeli nodded, trusting him completely, and together they moved toward the safety of the crevice. The lion watched, tense and ready to attack. But the cowboys' calm control and precise movements kept them just out of reach. Once they reached the alcove, James positioned himself between Nayeli and the canyon path, keeping his rifle ready. But the lion prowled below, growling softly, but it seemed to be reassessing its options. Nayeli, breathing heavily, leaned against the rock, her body still trembling. Britt. She looked at James with awe and gratitude. Britt. I thought we were done for, she whispered. James shook his head gently. Britt. Not yet, he said. Out here, the danger never really ends. Britt. But we've survived this far, haven't we? And we will survive today, too. Britt.
Just stay close to me. The next challenge came faster than expected.
Britt. From the opposite side of the canyon, another set of rustling noises emerged. Smaller, quicker, but unmistakable. A pack of coyotes had detected their presence, likely drawn by the mountain lion or simply the scent of humans. Britt. James assessed the situation quickly. They were outnumbered, and the narrow path meant limited mobility. But he would have to use both strategy and courage to protect Nayeli. Stay behind me, he instructed. Britt. And remember everything I taught you. Watch, listen, and don't panic. The coyotes approached cautiously, testing the boundaries of their territory. James stood his ground, making himself appear larger, his voice calm but firm as he called out to them, a warning to stay back. But Nayeli followed his example, her hands steady despite the fear racing through her body. Step by step, the cowboy and the girl moved along the alcove, avoiding direct confrontation while keeping a clear path toward safety. But it was a delicate balance. One wrong sound, one slip, and the animals could attack.
Nayeli's training in the tribe helped her remain quiet and alert, her instincts guiding her. She felt a strange sense of pride and confidence, realizing that she was no longer entirely helpless. She was learning to survive, to move carefully, and to trust both herself and the cowboy who had saved her life. After tense moments that felt like hours, the mountain lion finally retreated into the shadows, likely deciding that the risk was too high. The coyotes, less daring than the lion, also began to back away, their eyes still cautious but their interest fading. James waited until they were completely gone before lowering his rifle, his body still tense but relieved.
Nayeli exhaled deeply, feeling a weight lift from her chest. We made it, she said, her voice trembling but full of relief.
Dispresh. James nodded, giving her a small smile.
Yes, we did.
And we'll keep making it, as long as we stick together and stay alert. They continued their journey through the canyon, more cautious now than ever. James taught Nayeli additional skills as they moved. How to read the tracks of animals, how to recognize signs of danger in the wind and terrain, and how to remain calm in moments of fear. Every lesson was crucial, and Nayeli absorbed each one, her confidence growing with each step. As the sun began to set, they finally reached a small plateau overlooking a wide valley below. The landscape stretched endlessly, filled with the colors of twilight. James helped Nayeli down safely, and together they set up a camp, this time in a spot that offered both shelter and a clear view of the surrounding canyon.
By the fire, James reflected on the day's events.
Today was dangerous, he said.
But you handled yourself well.
Fear is natural, but courage is acting even when you're afraid. You've shown both, Britt. Nayeli smiled faintly, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced life-threatening situations, learned new skills, and survived under the guidance of someone she trusted. The bond between them had grown stronger, built on trust, respect, and shared experience. As night fell, the desert transformed into a world of shadows and starlight. The fire flickered, casting dancing shapes on the canyon walls. James kept watch while Nayeli rested, absorbing all she had learned. They had faced the worst of the canyon's dangers today, the mountain lion, the pack of coyotes, and the constant threat of the wilderness, and emerged alive. In that moment, both understood the significance of what they had endured. Survival depended on skill, courage, and trust. And more than that, it depended on the connection between people who faced danger together. The cowboy and the Apache girl had formed a bond that was unspoken but powerful, a bond that would guide them through whatever lay ahead.
As the stars shone overhead, they sat by the fire in quiet companionship, both aware that the next day would bring new challenges.
But for now, they allowed themselves a brief moment of peace, a moment to acknowledge the trials they had faced and the strength they had discovered within themselves and each other. The morning light filtered softly over the canyon, painting the rocks in warm golds and pinks. James stirred first, as always, carefully scanning the horizon. The night had passed quietly, without any signs of predators, and he allowed himself a small sigh of relief. Nayeli was still asleep on the blanket, her breathing slow and even. She looked peaceful, almost untouched by the dangers of the past days, but James knew that her courage had been tested in ways most children could not imagine. He gently nudged her awake. "Time to move," he said softly. "We're getting close to your people now." Nayeli blinked at him, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She felt a mix of relief and excitement. The thought of seeing her family again filled her with warmth, but she also felt a strange sadness. Over the past days, she had grown accustomed to having James by her side, guiding and protecting her. The bond they shared was unspoken, but undeniable. They packed their small camp quickly, the desert air crisp and cool in the early morning. Every movement was careful and deliberate, a habit learned from the days of survival in the canyon. James led the way, scanning the terrain for any potential threats, while Nayeli followed closely, remembering every lesson he had taught her about moving quietly, watching for signs of animals, and staying aware of the land. As they walked, the landscape began to change. The rocky cliffs gradually gave way to gentler hills, and patches of green appeared where the desert met streams and small groves of trees. Birds chirped from the branches, and the air smelled fresh with hints of water and wild flowers.
Nayeli felt a thrill of hope. They were close.
She could feel it in the air, a change from the tension and fear that had filled the canyon. After a few hours, they spotted smoke rising in the distance. Nayeli's heart leapt. "That's my tribe!" she exclaimed softly, pointing toward the familiar shapes of tents and small structures. James nodded, a faint smile appearing on his weathered face. He had known all along that this was their goal, and now, after days of danger and careful navigation, they had nearly reached it.
The last stretch of the journey was the most careful. The path down to the camp was narrow and uneven, and James ensured that Nayeli stayed close.
He reminded her of the importance of balance, of watching each step, and of keeping her attention on both the path and their surroundings. She followed his instructions diligently, feeling a sense of confidence in her own abilities, strengthened by everything she had endured.
Finally, they reached the edge of the camp. Nayeli's family and the other members of the tribe were moving about, preparing for the day. When she ran forward, her parents' eyes widened in relief and joy.
Her mother rushed to embrace her, holding her tightly, while her father examined her for any injuries. Nayeli felt a wave of emotion. Relief, happiness, and gratitude all at once.
Doubt. She had survived the dangers of the desert, guided by the cowboy, and now she was home. James stood a short distance away, observing quietly.
He had been there when she had faced wolves, a mountain lion, and a pack of coyotes. He had guided her through the harsh wilderness and ensured her safety.
And now, as he watched the reunion, he felt a quiet satisfaction. The girl was safe, and that was all that mattered. Her mother turned toward him, eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly.
"We don't know how we can repay you."
James shook his head.
"No need," he replied.
"She's brave, and she listened well. That helped more than anything else."
"Just keep her safe, and teach her what she's learned."
Nayeli ran back to James, taking his hand in hers. I will never forget you," she said. Her voice trembled slightly, but it was full of sincerity.
James knelt down to her level. "And I won't forget you either," he said. "You were brave, and you learned quickly."
That's all anyone could ask for. The tribe welcomed James cautiously at first. They were not used to strangers, especially ones who had traveled so far into the wilderness.
But seeing the bond between him and Nayeli, and hearing the story of how he had protected her, they accepted him with respect.
For them, his actions spoke louder than words.
Brown and desperate, He had risked his own safety to ensure that a child returned home unharmed, and that was enough to earn their trust.
Over the next few days, Nayeli shared the lessons she had learned from James with her family.
She spoke of how to move quietly, how to recognize signs of animals, and how to stay calm in moments of fear.
Her parents were impressed by her courage and skill, realizing that she had grown in ways they had never expected.
Desperate. And though James kept a quiet distance, he was proud to see that his guidance had made a difference. During this time, he and Nayeli often sat together near the stream that ran through the camp. They did not need many words. Their shared experiences and mutual respect spoke volumes. Nayeli practiced what she had learned, testing her balance on stones and identifying tracks in the sand. James watched, occasionally giving a tip or gentle correction, but mostly allowing her to demonstrate her own skills. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, James and Nayeli sat quietly by the fire. The sounds of the camp surrounded them, children laughing, animals moving, and the soft conversations of her family. Nayeli looked at him, a thoughtful expression on her face. I never knew the desert could be so dangerous and so beautiful, she said. James nodded.
It is both, he replied. That's why you must always respect it, pay attention, and stay prepared.
Danger is part of it, but so is life, growth, and discovery. You've learned that now,
Nayeli smiled.
I feel, stronger, she said, and braver. You should, James said.
You've survived more than most people could imagine. That bravery will stay with you as long as you remember what you've learned.
He had guided Nayeli safely back to her people, and his role in this chapter of her life was complete. The tribe gathered to say goodbye, expressing their gratitude and respect. Nayeli hugged him tightly. Thank you, she said again, tears in her eyes. You saved me. James smiled gently. And you saved yourself, he replied. You listened, stayed calm, and acted wisely. Remember that. You're stronger than you know. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, the sun rising behind him, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Nayeli watched him disappear into the distance, feeling a mixture of sadness and gratitude. She had survived the wilderness, faced life-threatening dangers, and returned home stronger and wiser than before. The lessons she had learned from the cowboy would stay with her for the rest of her life. Life in the tribe returned to normal, but Nayeli carried with her the memories of the journey. Every time she moved through the desert, she remembered the careful steps, the lessons in observation, and the courage it took to face fear. And she remembered James, the cowboy who had guided her, protected her, and trusted her to grow stronger. The story of their journey spread quietly among the tribe, not as a tale of danger or heroism alone, but as a story of courage, trust, and the bond that can form between people in the most unexpected circumstances. Desperate. Nayeli's parents praised her growth and bravery, realizing that the desert had taught her lessons no classroom could. And while James had returned to a solitary life in the wilderness, his influence remained in the girl he had saved. In the quiet moments by the stream or among the hills, Nayeli often thought of the cowboy. She remembered his steady gaze, his calm voice, and the lessons he had taught her. She understood now that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act wisely despite it. She had learned to survive, to trust, and to respect the land. And most importantly, to respect herself. The wilderness remained as wild and untamed as ever, full of dangers and beauty alike. But Nayeli no longer felt powerless within it.
She had faced its threats and emerged stronger, carrying with her the knowledge, courage, and resilience to face whatever challenges life might bring.
And in that understanding, she found peace, confidence, and a deep sense of gratitude for the man who had guided her through the most dangerous days of her young life.
As the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in colors of gold and red, Nayeli looked out over the desert she had survived. She knew that life would always have challenges, but she also knew that she was capable of facing them.
And somewhere in the distance, riding along the horizon, the cowboy continued his journey, leaving behind a legacy of courage, trust, and the quiet heroism of the wilderness.